Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you like this episode, please remember to hit the like button and leave a comment or two, then subscribe and click on the bell to receive notifications of whenever we release new videos. Also, please remember to share them to your social media. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to Cascade Creek, just 3.5 miles from the location of our previous episode on Buford Creek, discussing Matt Menge. Cascade Creek flows south, about 3.5 miles into the west fork of the Madison River. The valley bottom is over 8,200 feet high in elevation, and the mountains around it reach over 9,500 feet high. The climate here is a subalpine climate, with mild summer temperatures and cold winter temperatures. The Gravelies are the perfect habitat for grizzly bears, with abundant sources of food and remoteness granting few human interlopers. The whitebark pine trees provide a much-needed source of nutrients for bears, and the abundant elk population provides prey for them to hunt. The slopes are decorated with brilliant arrays of color when the willows and quaking aspen begin to drop their leaves in the fall. Engelman spruce and subalpine fir stands give way to protein-filled grasses and sage meadows below. Elk aren't the only prey for the grizzlies and the Gravelies. Deer and moose also flourish here. They in turn provide food for the black bears, cougars, coyotes, and wolves here. Grizzlies also hunt the prey animals here and frequently confront human hunters in dangerous and deadly interactions. On Friday, September 17, 2010, 49-year-old surveyor Kim Wunderlich was elk hunting with 3 of his elk hunting buddies. It was his birthday, and what better place to spend it than elk hunting with your friends? Kim and Mike Drent were natives of Kalispell, while 66-year-old John Wasser was visiting from Stillwater, Minnesota, and 64-year-old Bob Marquew came from Minnetonka, Minnesota. The men were all traditional bow hunters who believed in using primitive versions of archery equipment. Modern bows include cams and cables, which give the user a mechanical advantage, but traditional bows are built from wood and require more skill to shoot accurately. The men have hunted together for several years and enjoyed the time in the woods together. Marquew and Wunderlich met while trout fishing and became fast friends immediately a few years before this attack. Now on the second day of their bow hunt, the hunters woke well before dawn and jumped onto their ATVs for the 5-mile ride to the location they wanted to hunt. They hiked into a creek drainage and managed to find a herd of elk in the timber. Drent and Marquew decided to go one way on a ridge, and Wasser and Wunderlich headed the other way. They planned to meet back up at the top of the small ridge after they worked the timber in hopes of getting a shot at an elk. After getting close to a few bulls, but were unable to get a shot, Wunderlich and Wasser began to climb back toward their four-wheelers in the heat of the day. By early afternoon, Wasser and Wunderlich were working their way around a slope through some dark timber. They were within a few feet of each other when they heard a large twig snap uphill from them. As they both turned their heads, they saw a couple of bear cubs standing on their hind legs and staring at the men from about 25 yards away. The next thing they knew, a huge and angry sow grizzly was closing in on them at full speed. Now is a good time to mention how prepared or unprepared Wasser and Wunderlich were to run into a grizzly. There is no source indicating either of the men were carrying bear spray or a firearm. They were hunting with traditional archery equipment for that sense of participating in nature, as our ancestors did, but the experience they would have that day was far more primitive than what they bargained for. Wasser watched as the bear closed in on the men with anger in her eyes. He could tell she was not bluffing, and was coming to kill what she perceived as a threat to herself and her cubs. Wunderlich managed to yell "Bear!" before hiding behind a small tree. His movement drew the sow's full attention, and she immediately bounded in his direction. His eyes were drawn to her open mouth and her claws as she tore toward him. For the record, I am a bow hunter myself. I've often wondered what I would do if I were to encounter a bear sprinting toward me. I imagined myself using my bow as a defensive shield to keep the bear's teeth away from me while stabbing at it with my arrows with my other hand. The difference between what you can do and what you can only try to do is where the speed of a bear points out the flaws in your plans. Wunderlich lifted his wooden bow and extended his arm as a shield between himself and the grizzly. Her mouth was wide open, and he stuffed his bow into her mouth, but a 500-pound grizzly bear at full speed is far too powerful to be stopped by a man with his bow for a shield. The impact of the Grizzly knocked Wunderlich tumbling for 20 yards down the slope. By the time he'd stopped rolling, the sow had regained her feet and had pounced on top of him. Wasser was still frozen at the men's original spot up the hill. His tactic of remaining still had been successful in not drawing the Grizzly's attention to him, but was unsuccessful in keeping her from focusing on Wunderlich's movement. He yelled at the Grizzly as it straddled Wunderlich and worked to knock an arrow on his bowstring. Wunderlich was stunned by the impact of the sow and could only watch as she stood over him. He was terrified that the Grizzly might bite him by the head or neck and reached his hands out, trying to fend her jaws away from himself. The sow pushed through his hands and clamped her jaws onto the inner part of his thigh, only a few inches from his crotch. In a single powerful bite, she tore holes in his leg the size of 50-cent pieces. Wunderlich knew he couldn't fight her off, and given he was on his back, knew his only chance at survival depended on his ability to remain still. After the sow tore into Wunderlich's thigh, Wasser saw her spin and run back up the hill in the direction of her cubs. He watched her disappear while he was still trying to put the arrow on his bowstring. After making sure the sow and her cubs were heading away from them, Wasser made his way down to Wunderlich's side. He could see Wunderlich's arrows and other gear scattered around, but was amazed that his hunting partner was already standing on his feet. Wunderlich could feel blood steadily flowing down his thighs, but refused to look at his injuries to avoid revealing the severity of them to himself. Wasser packed Wunderlich's thigh wounds with gauze and wrapped it tightly. The men slowly worked their way back down the ridge for 1.5 miles while yelling for Drenth and Marku. After locating their hunting partners, the hunters made their way back to Drenth's pickup truck. They helped Wunderlich into the cab of the truck and bounced and skidded their way 70 miles on backcountry roads to the clinic at Dillon, arriving at 8:15 at night. Now Dillon is a dot of a town, smaller than a dot missing the T. The small clinic there managed to clean and bandage Wunderlich's thigh wound, and were thankful to note the bear's bite had just missed puncturing his femoral artery by a single centimeter. Wunderlich was released to heal at his home eventually. His elk hunting season was over, but he wasn't seriously injured and managed to escape with all his fingers and toes intact. On the drive to Dillon, Drenth told Wunderlich that he and Marku were uphill from where Wunderlich was attacked. The sow had fled up the hill with her cubs and ran right into the other 2 members of the hunting party. Marku and Drenth managed to yell at her, and she veered off in her escape. They were very close to being her next victims. When asked about his thoughts on the grizzly bear attack on Wunderlich, Wasser said that a bazooka wouldn't have stopped that sow from attacking that day. She was so fast and angry that she could have done whatever she had wanted to the men, and they would have been powerless to stop her. When asked how he was feeling after the grizzly's attack, Wunderlich stated that he had peace about the event due to his faith. He said he was protected that day in a spiritual sense. After Wunderlich's attack, Wasser and Marku were so disheartened by the event that they immediately packed their gear and returned home. They swore off ever returning to hunt in those woods again. They also commented on how unbelievably tough Wunderlich was in dealing with the trauma and pain of his injuries. Following reports on Wunderlich's grizzly attack, the area was cordoned off and warning signs were posted to keep people out of the location. DNA evidence from the sow was gathered from Wunderlich's clothing to compare to future samples in the event of further attacks. The authorities regarded the sow's attack as a defensive attack, given she fled the area and didn't try to do more damage to Wunderlich than she did. They also refused to indicate that the sow that attacked Wunderlich was the same bear that attacked Menge only 5 days prior. They took no action against the sow and her cubs. Wunderlich eventually made a full recovery, but I could find no source indicating if he'd ever ventured back into the woods to continue archery hunting. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I'm left with a few questions for you. Do you think it was the same bear that attacked Wunderlich and Menge? Why did the sow run away from Drenth and Marku at the top of the ridge instead of attacking one or both of them? What additional actions should authorities take to protect hunters and bears? The next time you're in the woods and you hear a twig snap, will you try to hide behind a tree or try to remain still? I'll be glad to read and reply to your thoughts, so please post them in the comments section below and let's talk about it. Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider clicking on the like button and clicking on the bell icon. We'll help you know when we post our new episodes. Posting our video links to your social media profiles furthers awareness, and it's fun. We slashed our prices in our merch store, linked below, so check out the bargains there while you shop. As a member of our human community, remember to adventure bravely and be careful out there, especially in bear country.